Hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Let's see. És látni a is analaya. Gusolo ist ich. Beleg ein Zlekas ich belohish. Nalek. Good. And this should help me defeat my enemies. All I need now is to find a way and do some diplomacy, but the letter should not be too hard. Welcome everyone to this new episode of the Count County. The first proper episode I make in English of the year 2022. And as of now, you might be wondering, why does your episode bears the name of a certain part of the third edition, well, 2.5 to be exact, player handbook? Well, it is because a certain spell and the research made by some animators related to it ties in with some bits of lore and folklore and literature of the medieval world. More precisely, we mostly pick in information from the likes of Les Laits de Marie de France and Les Romans de la Table Ronde by Chrétien de Troyes, as well as some other bits of work and folklore I know from there and there. And surprisingly enough, there's quite a bit of interesting information disseminated both in the in-game encyclopedia and within the books of Kingdom Come Deliverance. This guy really did a nice bit of work. So, for those who haven't guessed it yet, we shall be mainly speaking about the Fae. Who they are, where they come from, and whatnot. And more precisely for the Fae, I want to put it right there, just to give you a rough idea. Forget your Tinkerbell fairies or your generic D&D elves that are boring and of no interest. We are speaking proper medieval Fae. And just to give you what they look like, pick up Galadriel. Now imagine that there is a bunch of them, and imagine that each Galadriel is merely the maid serving the Fae Lord, Fae Lady, that is the true epitome of beauty that your medieval hero will encounter, and who is of course only playable by Lagertha, our beloved Catherine Winnick herself, who I would not be surprised to learn is an actual fake come to this earth. Yeah, I'm biased, but if you've seen my video when I talk about the clubs, that should have been a given. But yeah, Lagertha and our maids are all a bunch of Galadriels. And this is to put you into the mindset of how far these things can go with the good old folklore. And now, without much more without much more tangents, I shall introduce today's presenter and next member of the team that you've seen in the intro, so for those who watched it but haven't yet the chance to meet her, Rock, who is merely a rock. Sure, she might sound smarter in German, because a rock in German means Einstein. But yeah, she's our local literature expert. You've met the intern, and now Rock.
Hello, it is I, the stone. It is me that shall for now take the video, and then I shall maybe come from time to time depending on how much you all like it. So let's start. So starting with the essential, as some of you might have guessed, the page of the player handbook is that of the geese power, which we also refer to some cartoon that apparently the count likes for some reason, and in both geese is pronounced as such and is a power, but in reality geese is an Irish word pronounced geesh and is not so much a power unless you possibly consider having lots of children and or money a power. But with Batman I can really see that. But nonetheless, it is not a power but a part of a deal. More precisely, when you meet a fée and she is interested in dating you or even marrying you, there is a deal that you do with her, and in that deal, well, there always is this condition, this constraining condition. It's the one specific thing that you'd imagine, a pact or something that may seem weird, and if you do it, well, too bad. And it is logical we see it everywhere in medieval folklore, since it was a society of contract and giving your word. Now, as for said contract, would you breach it, then there would be some consequences, namely the end of your relation. That is of course as at best, because when the condition is not asking the person who come whenever you ask to come too much, the person coming too much might cause the death of one or both of you. So yeah, death can be a consequence in some cases, because let's face it, they are male phase, but I'll get to back later. Oh yeah, and of course the end of your relation can always be considered quite a bad thing. Now, in some cases the offender who broke the promise can redeem himself. One such cases in one of the Chrétien III's tales was a knight who, after breaching his word of not telling the queen or anyone really about the source of his money, he refused when upon trial of saying that there were someone much more beautiful than the queen. Then, by trying to make up for it and still, despite having failed hold his own, the fée he was dating came back to his rescue, and then they departed together, never to be seen. That is of course one case. The case of death was in one of Mary's and in this, well, The Faye was a guy. He died. The mother died in childbirth. The kid, in the end, avenged them both. So there's always a way for an ending to be not too bad, but even there. And of course, in some cases, the Fae just disappears alone, never to be seen, or sometimes only reappears as a ghost to warn of great tragedies, as it is the case with the Melusine myth. Now, as mentioned, the part that you receive from the deal is usually money, lots of it, but sometimes you can also get children. Well, I say children, but I should say several children, because in some cases you may have enough child to spawn several dynasties, and your Fae partner will go as far as becoming a symbol from one of them several generations in the future in another country because of how far you spread. So yeah, answering your lineage and the survival of your bloodline can usually be seen as a great thing, and of course, as I said, money can always be useful if only to get the best of armor. Though sometimes Fae have access to other resources where they live, where by going there you have access to a lot of things and can go from being a nobody to being a great lord. So there's a lot of things, but the point remains that, as I mentioned, they will not give you power per se, though some of them might use some magic abilities on you, but I shall come back to that. Now, as for the Fae realm, well, some of you might imagine the special dimension from the cartoon where it's a metaphysical dimension weapon to kill everything, and you can use it to kill the English monarch. To the Count's deception, no. And it is also not some great, shall we say, representations of the seasons or things like that, as in some myth. It's not. I would not say it's not Narnia, but it's not necessarily that far from it. But it would be more like the D&D a mix of the D&D Feywild. World of Darkness might have a bit of it. It's a mix of several things. And there was some theories that it was actually the world of the dead, but it would have been the Celtic world of the dead, and even there it is quite unsure. Based on the evidence we have, and we might still be running with it, it is simply a parallel world to ours that have some different points of entry from there and there. Both worlds appear to be quite similar, though the other world might have some temporal anomaly where a few minutes there can be years in this world. So there's time dilation. Sometimes it is mainly a richer and more classic version of ours, where you can have castles side by side covered in gold, one for the husband, one for the wife, and one for the kid, just to give you an idea. It's pretty much all around. Put your fantasies in there, but still it's never explained as that fancy. It can be very rich, it can be very wild, but it's not flying rocks and fuck the physics. So there's that too. It's still somewhat similar. As for the travel there, well, It's travel from the edges of the known world and the edges of the conscience. In other words, you might pick up a boat and get there. Maybe you'll walk through the fog, like for Ravenloft, and get there. Maybe just by walking in the woods, or there's a tunnel under a hill, which has also led people to believe it is the world of the dead, because sometimes it's a tunnel that leads there. Sometimes just traveling some normal way. Sometimes there's a gate. Nonetheless, the point remains that it is a point, some point a bit far off from the main civilization. So in the wild, usually it's a bit far off, and as civilization grows and expands, they seems to close themselves, and usually it has to be traversed by the people from the other side, even if sometimes people from ours can traverse them, be it accidentally, upon an invitation, or with the help of the others. So it's to resume, it's always some far off point. Sometimes you just travel and boop, you're there. Sometimes there is an anomaly, and sometimes there is a gate. Now, to finish up with those fae. As for the fae themselves, as the count has told, they are human-like, and as mentioned, they can breed with human. So if they're not different species of human, they are still very close and magically tied so that they can produce offsprings. But on top of the human-like manner, it is said that yes, most of them tend to be beautiful, but the opposite exists. Some that are, or sometimes some of their offsprings that are ugly until something happens that eventually makes them beautiful. And on top of that, there are some powers that are to be known upon them. So obviously, some of them can live quite long, sometimes because they are in a time dilation bubble. Sometimes they have some natural longevity, and they may also have some powers. Within these powers, we know of sometimes they might do spells or potions, but it's very rare, and maybe they can command bits of nature. Of course, there's always the traveling between the two worlds. So as you can see, they might have powers, but they're not that extravagant or flashy for the most part. The more flashy things would be the shape-shifting. So most of the creatures of these other dimensions, and by the way, the Celt gods and other creatures that have more flash power might be included, but there's a bit of a confusion and doubt, so that might be for another video. Going back to the shapeshiftings, there are many creatures that are shapeshifters, and among the fae themselves, several of them have been known of powers. Of course, they are the wyverns in English, that are that are sometimes described as the offsprings of dragons and snakes. But I can't will go in detail between them, but this is the case of Melusine, the most famous of them all, and the point is that they can be beautiful women, they can be winged snakes, or they can be your standard snake and woman mix from most Indo-European mythology. And this creature, as per their mythological roots suggest, are really tied to fertility and can bring lots of children. Now, in the Melusine case, more precisely, she had lots of springs. The condition was broken, and then she flew away. And depending on the myth, sometimes the air or a ghost comes back when a death will appear, and from the numerous offsprings of the original lord, several noble houses in east of France and in Germany have sprouted, and it went even as far as Bohemia. And when the Count spoke of Kingdom Come, well, one of the theories is that Melusine is behind the origin of the dragon emblem for, well, emblem, I should say, part of the coat of arms of Sigismund, who eventually, and that is according to the book in the game, who eventually founded the Order of the Dragon, and therefore eventually gave the name Dracula to Vlad Tepes. So as you can see, you can have a legacy of sleeping with a snake to the point where it several generations and centuries after means that some far spring name another in the name of the snake, and the other become famous because the son of one of its members become a great hero who defend Europe against the Ottomans. So as you can see, it can go quite far. And still in the shapeshifting, another known example is one of the male face that used to shapeshift into a bird. And now the Count is telling me to add Animorph style. Nonetheless, he got into a bird, went to his ladies, but the lady was married. Eventually, she got pregnant, but called on the guy one time too many, and her husband killed him, arranged for a trap that got him killed. The bird guy died. The lady died in childbirth or really soon after, and then it became up to their son to avenge their death, kill the evil lord, and then go back to his father's realm. So, in conclusion, the Fae are human-related creatures, usually of a great appearance, sometimes have some power, namely shapeshifting. They come from a parallel world that is quite similar, but with few fantastic differences and exaggerated threat, as well as sometimes temporal anomaly. And these creatures come to our world and usually date some people, be the Night Lord or other, and during their dating they do make a deal which has a special condition called the geese, or, and I forgot to say it earlier, in Gaelic, well, the Breton Gaelic, it's called Tinweld. Gish is more of the Irish word. So, and this gish, which is the special condition, is the key of whether or not the relation succeed. That relation will usually give you offsprings and lots of fertility, but breaking it can be quite dangerous. And of course, it's the thing that inspired that one power from in Dungeons and Dragons, who itself inspired the cartoon owned by Pizza Hut. On this, I bid you farewell, and until the next time at the Count's Cantier.